But
sorry
perhaps,
about that.
That's all right. That's all right. Okay. But probably before we get too far into this, I feel it's of vital importance that we take a moment of pause, a moment of reflection, and a moment of silence for the lives that have been lost recently, both here in our home state of New York, up in Buffalo, but as well as so tragically to just today in Uvalde, the 21 individuals who lost their lives, the 19 children and 2 educators who lost their lives at the hands of a national terrorist. So with that, I'm just going to give us a few moments. So please just reflect on the moment in this pause. Thank you. These tragic events are very significant in the context of our conversation, our ongoing conversation about Tulsa. It brings into light the fact that the realities of the Tulsa Massacre and the background, the content, the backdrop is still very much the same in striking ways. The Buffalo incident in and of itself reminds us of this. It's tragic, yes, it's tragic, but we have to be vigilant. We have to have moments like this, discourse and conversation that crosses boundaries, that crosses communities, that crosses our great land and our great nation, if we're going to do anything to change any of it. And having said that, I would like to now show just briefly a video that really gives us the context and the background of Buffalo, the community, how it has been impacted, how it has been handicapped in many ways, even before this incident, so that we can have an awareness of just the impact, the magnitude, and the scope of Tulsa. So give me just one moment and I would like to share my screen. Let's see. There we go. Share the screen here. And this bit of news is from CBS Morning.
Officials say the alleged gunman in Buffalo's mass shooting chose his target because of the high percentage of Black people in that particular area, which raises a question. How did that neighborhood become so segregated in the first place? A University of Michigan analysis found that the Buffalo-Niagara Falls metro area overall is the 6th most segregated in the whole U.S. And another study by the University of Buffalo concluded last year that the economic conditions for Black people in that city had not improved in 3 decades. We spoke to Professor Henry Lewis Taylor, who worked on that study and who told us why Buffalo's East Side looks the way it does today.
The process of segregation is driven by the way in which we build cities. Within the urban areas, ever since the rise of home ownership in the United States, there has been a sorting and sifting process to separate higher income whites from lower income Blacks. Back in 1940, Buffalo was one of the most integrated cities in the United States. But as home ownership increased and as we saw this land valuation system occur, Blacks were concentrated in places on the east side where the most undesirable residential lands in the city existed.
And is there a connection between that history and what we saw unfold this past weekend?
I think there's a big connection. If you drive around this neighborhood and community and you see folks living in the dilapidated and rundown houses, the streets and sidewalks that are literally non-existent, the unkept vacant lots. Black people fight against this.
So because the people in the neighborhood like this fight against the condition of the neighborhood,
it makes them a target. It makes them a target.
I take it you were not surprised or already knew that this was the only full service grocery in this area.
There are over 100,000 Black people in Buffalo, and the fact that there's only one major supermarket servicing them is a disgrace. But that was years of struggle and battle and fighting. It just didn't happen. And so it represents a symbol of hope and possibility. It represents what we can accomplish when we struggle just to get one food store. So that's what this food shop, one of the few places where we can get nutritious food to eat, and you attack it. You attack it.
You can hear the anguish in his voice.
Professor Taylor is an incredibly knowledgeable and passionate speaker. His point is that when you look at the built environment around you, remember it's not an accident that it looks the way it does. And it's not a choice either. It's deliberate.
Yeah, just like this attack was deliberate. Well done, Tony.
Thank you. Again, obviously there are some key differences in the communities.
Just off the side of the road sat a grand white
sorry.
house called Sharswood. Silently
Did I not?
Secrets from the
Didn't turn that off. Sorry about that. And let me just get it out of it. There we go. The sound doesn't come back up. Again, so there were obvious differences in the two communities. Green was Black Wall Street. It was an affluent neighborhood, but the affluence evoked the same ire, the same hatred, the same venomous hate that laid it to waste. That was not the choice of the people who were living there peacefully, who were establishing their communities, living their lives, and their generational family stories were building and evolving there. But they were targeted. They were targeted, just as they were in Buffalo. Now, let's turn back now that we've set that kind of contemporary page, to know that what we're going to be getting into this evening is not some distant history, that it's still happening today. With that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Shelly Martin-Young, who will be taking us through some of the work that she has done on this topic. A brief introduction about Dr. Martin-Young. She is a 30-year veteran teacher who has spent her time teaching 4th and 5th graders, and this is particularly resonant today in view of Texas, who, after receiving her master's in library media, spent the last 7 of her K through 12 years in an elementary library. In 2015, she decided to pursue her PhD, and she finished that program in December of 2021. She received her doctorate in language, literacy, and culture. Her dissertation was focused on the hidden history of the Tulsa Race Massacre. Many of her research interests include hidden history, using children's and young adult literature to disrupt the textbook, and the importance of learning about your place. She travels around the country presenting at conferences and has also presented many times internationally. And with that brief and very modest introduction, I now hand the microphone over to Dr. Shelly Martin-Young.
Hello. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm going to share my screen. I have a PowerPoint, so it'll just take 1 sec to share my screen. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay. The video that Valerie showed very much goes with the Tulsa Race Massacre and the research that I've done. I titled this Hidden History and the Journey to Learn and Unlearn. That was my work for my PhD, but I'm going to give you some background about me and my community and Tulsa. I don't know how much Annalise got into the Tulsa Race Massacre when she spoke, or if you were here when Annalise spoke, but I'm going to give some background about me and my discoveries, the Tulsa Race Massacre then, and what is Tulsa now. and talk a little bit about your story and how important it is to share your story. So the race massacre, of course, happened 100 years ago. We just honored the 100-year commemoration. I don't want to say celebration, commemoration of the Tulsa Race Massacre in June of last year. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. Like Valerie said, I was an educator for 30 years, and I was taking a workshop. My very first class, when I started my PhD, I was taking a writing workshop, and we took a tour of John Hope Franklin Reconciliation Park for one of our field trips. And I saw this plaque, and I read this plaque, and I was shocked. I was 50 years old, had taught for almost 30 years. I have never lived outside of Tulsa County ever in my entire, I'm 56 now. I've never lived outside of Tulsa County, and I did not know about the Tulsa Race Massacre. I learned about it when I took a walk through Tulsa and saw the plaques in the ground. But the first thing I saw was this plaque that is inside of the John Hope Franklin Reconciliation Park. And this really did some damage to me. I was shocked. I was angry. I felt guilt. I felt shame. I was upset that I had not ever taught about this event. It really changed my life. And I had to do some reflecting on who I was as a white person and as a teacher, and the importance of this event that I knew nothing about. And so the next thing that we had to do after we read this plaque is there is a statue, but our docent who was telling us about the Tulsa Race Massacre made us raise our hands in the air, just like this man is, and walk through the park. And what this picture is the after the massacre, this Black gentleman is being marched through town with his hands in the air in surrender. And there's a statue called Surrender in John Hope Franklin Park. And this man is what this picture is based on. And so this was my introduction to the Tulsa Race Massacre. I had no clue. And like I said, it really kind of destroyed me. I was angry for a while. I was sad. It's just a lot. And so then I started reflecting on my place, which I live in a town right outside of Tulsa. It's still Tulsa County. It's Sand Springs. And I started thinking about how I grew up. I grew up in a white town, in a white community. I went to white churches, white schools. I had white teachers. My grandfather was the chief of police. Sand Springs was a sundown town. I don't know if you know what sundown towns are, but you can see from this ticket, this was colored as what was the nice term in the 40s and 50s. This man peeked through a window at the home of a white man. So a sundown town, if you didn't know, is where people of color had to be in their place when the sun went down. And so my grandfather was the chief of police during this time, and we went through his ticket book. We found one of his ticket books, and there were tickets over and over that talked about this time period. And so this is the community that I grew up in. I graduated from high school in 1984. When I graduated from Sand Springs High School, our community was still segregated. And we had been segregated until recently. And when I say recently, the past 10 or 15 years, there was one area in my town where Black people could live. And when I was in school, it was called Colored Town. And when my mom was in school, it was called worse than that. So this is just the things that I had to reconcile in myself, learning about this history, and then trying to teach other people about this history. So I've had to do a lot of thinking, reflecting, a lot of learning. I had to learn, about privilege. I'd never heard the word white privilege before. I've had to learn some things, and I've had to unlearn some things. My dissertation, like I said, was on the Tulsa Race Massacre. And I really struggled with what right do I have as a white woman writing about the Tulsa Race Massacre, because it's not my story. I wrestled with that. And so I grew up, my dad was racist. very, very racist, but it was just not something I ever thought about until I learned about this. And I look at what Tulsa still is and what my town of Sand Springs is. That's right there, still very racist community. And so working through this generational racism and things that I have to learn and unlearn. And so I did my dissertation, and this is just kind of just a little bit of information. I did my dissertation. I taught a workshop about how to teach the Tulsa Race Massacre in schools. And then I followed 7 teachers for 2 years and how they incorporated teaching about the massacre in their schools, and also how, I don't know what laws they've passed in New York, but right at the very end of my dissertation writing, when I was doing my final interview with the teachers, our governor had just passed the anti-CRT bill. So it was really interesting talking to these women, but 6 of these 7 women, like me, grew up in the Tulsa area. 5 of the 7 had learned about it as adults. 2 of them kind of learned about it when they were in high school, but it was just not something that was taught. And so they were, like me, adults finding out about the Tulsa Race Massacre. One of them found out about it. I mean, she'd kind of heard about it when she came to our workshop, but she really didn't know. 7 of the 7 teachers that I interviewed taught in Tulsa area. 0 of those 7 teachers had ever taught about the Tulsa Race Massacre. And so, and this quote I thought was really interesting. I could tell you, this is from one of my participants, I could tell you about the history in colonial Williamsburg, but I couldn't tell you the history in my own backyard. And that's pretty relevant to this whole thought of place and the importance of knowing our place. And so I'm going to tell you just really quickly, I could talk forever about the Tulsa Race Massacre. So if you want me to shut up, you might have to just tell me to shut up. And if you have questions, put them in the chat. I can't see the questions, but I think somebody's going to save them for me. So I'm going to tell you just a little bit about the whole Tulsa Race Massacre, and then I'm going to talk to you about what Tulsa is today. So this is a book. Dreamland Burning is a fiction novel written by a white woman, Jennifer Latham, about the Tulsa Race Massacre. It's one that is used here in Oklahoma sometimes now, although since the CRT thing passed, Broken Arrow was going to use Dreamland Burning for their 9th graders, but since Stitt passed the CRT, they withdrew that. So I don't know. But this quote, "The lives that ended that night mattered. It was a mistake for this city to try to forget. And it's an even bigger one to pretend everything's fine now. Black men and women are dying today for the same reasons they did in 1921. And we have to call that out every single time." People think that we're in a post-racial, society and all of this, and we're not. People are still dying. We see that with the video we just watched. People are still dying. Black men and women are dying today for the same reasons that they died in Tulsa in 1921. And it was a mistake for Tulsa to try to hide it. And now some people still try to pretend that everything's fine, and it's not. We may never know. Dr. Scott Ellsworth is an Oklahoma University professor who does a lot of work on the Tulsa Race Massacre. We may not ever know all the details of the events surrounding the Tulsa Race Massacre, even though we know enough to see the trauma it caused. And there are several reasons that we don't know what happened. It was suppressed. This story was actively suppressed. It did not become a standard. The reason I didn't teach it is because I didn't know about it and I wasn't taught about it. It did not become a standard in the state of Oklahoma until 80 years after this happened. So in 2012, it finally became a standard, and they're just now writing curriculum, and the curriculum that they're writing, it's not wonderful curriculum. So it was actively suppressed from the media, from those that perpetrated it, and from the survivors who didn't want to talk about it. Records were destroyed. Government wouldn't talk about it. Newspaper articles went missing. There was an article that they kind of attribute to starting the massacre that talked about hanging Dick Rowland, and that newspaper has never been found. So it wasn't talked about, and it was hidden for so long. So we really don't know, exactly what happened. the stuff that we know. I mean, this whole shelf is my books about the Tulsa Race Massacre, all of that whole shelf in my library. You know, what we know is stories that are, you know, some of the family members have finally started sharing. And so, you know, we don't really know what happened, but Valerie kind of hinted to this. Greenwood was this very successful neighborhood in Tulsa, very successful. It was prosperous. There were 10,000 residents living in this area in Greenwood, businesses, homes. They had doctors and grocery stores and churches and hotels and just on and on and on and on and on. But if you think of what was going on, you know, if you think about 1919 and the Red Summer, 1921 in Tulsa, we have the Ku Klux Klan starting to rear its head in that area. Lots of hatred, lots of jealousy, envy, all of this was going on while Greenwood is growing and thriving. And it became known as Black Wall Street because of the money and the everything that was going on there. It also became a place of jealousy for Tulsa's white people. There were 191 businesses prior to the race massacre of 1921, 15 doctors, a chiropractor, 2 dentists, 3 lawyers, library, 2 schools, a hospital, Tulsa Public Health Service. There were 1,149 residents, and most of them were occupied by more than one person or even one family. I have this PowerPoint, and if you want it, I've sent it to the ladies. So I have lots of resources on here. So you are welcome, Valerie, to share this with anybody that wants it. So there's a virtual tour that you can take. And I put, again, lots of resources at the end of this also. So this just kind of shows where Greenwood was. And this is Tulsa. So this would be Greenwood. It was 35 city blocks of this amazing prospering society. In 1921, this was in Tulsa. So you have oil money, there's a population growth, there's a boom, there's oil money, there is also rampant racism. 61 lynchings had been reported in 1920, 57 in 1921, too, just a couple of days before the massacre. Segregation, of course, was going on at this time as well. Then you also had the veterans, the Black veterans coming home from the war, wanting equal rights and demanding equal rights. So all of this was boiling in Tulsa in 1921. This was a picture in just a couple of years later in Sapulpa, which is just another 20 minutes from my house. There may be people in there who are related to me, who knows, but this was just a few years later in Oklahoma. So what happened, and you probably have already heard the story, but there was an incident on an elevator with Dick Rowland, who was a shoe shine operator, and Sarah Page, who was a 17-year-old, they think, white elevator operator in the Drexel building. This was over Memorial Day weekend, and Dick Rowland was a shoe shine operator, and the Drexel building, you could go to the restroom, but if you're Black, you had to go up to the top floor to go to the restroom. And so he got on the elevator to go up to the restroom, and something happened. We don't know what happened. We don't know if, the elevator sometimes doesn't, he tripped. We don't know what happened exactly. And there are still questions about the two of them and their relationship. Stories are told that they were actually a couple, but I haven't found any reliable sources, although people tell me they're there. Whatever happened, he bumped into her. She screamed. Now, if you think about this, she's a white woman in an elevator alone with a Black man, and she screams. And of course, his first reaction, he's like, I'm getting out of here. So he runs. And of course, when she screams, then all heck breaks loose, and they want to lynch him. This lynchings have been going on, And so they want to string up Dick Rowland. The Tulsa Tribune publishes an article. Can you see that? You probably can't because I'd have to stop and share. Anyway, they nab Negro for, I can't see it because you have to, aggravates me. Anyway, they published this article about insinuating basically that he tried to rape her. And so then everybody's up in arms. He is arrested and held in the courthouse, Tulsa courthouse downtown. And the sheriff there does try to protect Rowland. He has armed guards there to protect him. A.J. Smitherman, the owner of the Black newspaper, organized a group of men to prevent a lynching. So you've got white people that are wanting to lynch him. Then you've also got this group of Black people who want to try to prevent the lynching. The sheriff says no and sends the group of Black men back to Greenwood. The Evening Tulsa Tribune article calls for a lynching, and this is the newspaper article that they can't find anymore. It disappeared. There are articles from that morning, the articles from the next day, but that evening newspaper article that they kind of attribute to sparking the whole thing has disappeared. So by 9:30 that night, there's a mob of white people surrounding the courthouse demanding they wanted Rowland to come out. And then a group of armed Black men, many of them veterans, came to the courthouse. They came back to the courthouse, and there was some tussling and whatever, and a shot was fired. Nobody knows who fired the first shot. But there was an altercation, and at the time, both Black men and white men are shot. And then that's when the full-scale riot begins. And these are just some pictures. This is Mount Zion Baptist Church, which is still in Tulsa today. You can visit Mount Zion Baptist Church, and I'll tell you a story about Mount Zion. Wednesday morning, so this was Tuesday night, May 31st into June 1st, up to 10,000 whites began a coordinated attack on Greenwood, looting and burning homes and businesses. Now, remember, this was 35 blocks of success, and it was burned to the ground. And even the police officers, who's the group that comes out to help, they were all, in on this destroying. Many Black families fled in the night. Others were forced out of their homes and taken at gunpoint to holding centers. So they're in internment camps. A lot of times I didn't even know about the Japanese internment until later. So they were taken to internment camps, and some of them were held for a week in these. There were 3, I believe, and they could only leave if a white person would come and vouch for them. And they had signs, kind of like if you think about the Holocaust, wearing a star, they had signs, and a white person had to come and vouch for them as the only way that they could get out of these internment camps. A martial law was finally declared, and there were 300 plus dead. Of course, that's not even acknowledged right now. 10,000 plus were homeless. The number is still one of the sore spots in Tulsa. The name riot compared to massacre is still a sore spot in Tulsa 100 years later. And these are just some pictures. There's lots that you can do with pictures if you're an educator, if you are a speaker. I teach how to use some methods to look at pictures, but this you can tell by running the Negro out of Tulsa. Little Africa on fire. And this is, you can see, as the aftermath. And these pictures are all from the Oklahoma Historical Society. She ended, Jennifer Latham, again in Dreamland Burning, ended, "I don't believe that history holds easy answers or simple lessons, because those answers and lessons are stretched out over thousands, millions of untold stories. But I do believe that if we seek those stories out, and if we listen to them and talk to each other with open hearts and minds, we can start to heal. I believe that good people working together can create meaningful change." And so there are tons still of stories from the Tulsa Race Massacre that we will never, ever know. We have people that have written books. We have survivors who have shared accounts. Annalise talked about her grandmother, and I have her book on my Tulsa Race Massacre bookshelf over there. But we've got to hear, and we've got to be able to talk and discuss it. Black Wall Street today, they did in the early 26, they tried to rebuild. The spirit of the people was not destroyed. Black Tulsa, this was W.E.B. Du Bois said in 1926 after he came to visit that Black Tulsa is a happy city. It's young and gay and strong. And then the second massacre of Greenwood happened. And that's what they're called. Urban renewal is now considered the second massacre of Greenwood. So when Greenwood was thriving, it was 35 blocks. Today it's 1 block. Today it is cut in half by I-244. And I've got a picture I can show you. OSU Tulsa, where I took many of my classes, also sits on some of the land where the Tulsa Race Massacre happened. So there's lots of stuff still going on in Tulsa. There are people that still deny it even happened. There are people that, there's a search. Our mayor began before the 100-year commemoration searching for mass graves because the official number is like 27, but it's reported that there are over 300. And so they have been searching for mass graves in different places in Tulsa. They have different equipment, different people coming out searching for mass graves, but there are people that think that that shouldn't happen. There is talk of reparations. There are people that don't want that to happen. Social media is the bane of my existence. When I taught this workshop about the Tulsa Race Massacre, every news station, because I don't know why, but every news station came out and was with us the whole 3 or 4 days of this workshop. Every news station would go home that night and put their little stuff on Facebook. And then the comments were horrendous. And so you see what's going on in Tulsa we're still divided in Tulsa. There's, like I said, division over reparations. Somebody in New York just donated. So we have 3 survivors. Somebody in New York just donated $1 million for them to divide. And the backlash from that was insane. Somebody else gave them the money. Why does it matter to anybody? But one separate section of my research is just on the social media response and the comments like, the white people didn't start it, except not in those nice terms. It was a riot. It wasn't a massacre. Why do I have to care about it when I didn't have anything to do with it? Just ignorance, really. The reparations thing. Do you know that one of the reasons that it was called a riot instead of a massacre? The insurance companies didn't have to pay reparations. There was one insurance claim that was paid out from the Tulsa Race Massacre, and it was to a white man whose store was broken into and some of his guns were stolen. All of those other things that were destroyed, nothing has ever been paid. No insurance has been paid on any of those. There's a video. I'm not going to show it again. These are all just links to different things that you can look at if you have time, because I know that we'll probably run out of time here. We also have renaming things in Tulsa, which, with the statues and everything, we have a main street in Tulsa called Brady Street, and we have Brady Theater. And this was named for a Brady who was in the KKK. He was a big deal in the KKK in the Tulsa area. This name Brady is reflective of him and the KKK. And so, of course, the community wanted to rename that Brady Street. So instead of changing the name, they said, well, we'll just say it's after a different Brady. So they left it Brady Street, except now they say it's a different Brady that's not even from Oklahoma. That's not really changing the name. You know, there's no way to heal when you're not acknowledging what's going on. The story was covered up. So this is Greenwood, and this highway goes right through it. So it had started to rebuild, and then urban renewal happened. So here's Greenwood. Right here is OSU Tulsa, and we're having some issues with land acknowledgement. Then we've got the Tulsa Drillers baseball field. So again, from 35 blocks to 1. I thought this was pretty powerful, I think maybe it just be me, but this was a new mural they did about the Tulsa Race Massacre for the 100-year commemoration. And it is sitting, if you notice in this picture down here, they have it right in front of the OSU Tulsa sign. You can kind of see the Oklahoma State University sign, but this is sitting right in front of it. And I found it ironic that the Tulsa Race Massacre was covered up for so long, and now they've covered up Oklahoma State University. I work for Oklahoma State University. There's some work that still needs to be done. They are working on things and working with the community, because we do have this land that we have to acknowledge what happened where the university sits. So there are just some things that we need to ask. You know, I didn't learn about the Tulsa Race Massacre. So who writes history? You can unmute yourselves. Who writes history? Annalise, you look like you want to say something.
Well, thank you for that invitation.
Oh.
The victors write history. The powerful write history. The enfranchised write history. Those who have assured that their voices alone are heard write history. And so, of course, this is a conversation that needs to happen, but once again, people are being silenced. Their history is being erased, because we know that right now, afoot in our country, are efforts to have a unified vision of us as Americans, to which we should all ascribe, despite the fact that there is a diverse history in America. People may not want to hear that term, and it may be a bit overused, but we as Americans, and all of us as American as the next person, do have a diversity of experience. And those experiences, whether we acknowledge and report them or not, do matter, because they play out in certain ways. And without the explanations that true and accurate history and complete history, without those explanations, but that the whole entirety of it provides, there is always, not just the possibility for conflict, the inevitability of conflict. You mentioned something about reparations. I had not, after the $1 million were given, I had not heard that there was backlash to that. But I would point people to an article that was in that came out in the New York Times, also in the Washington Post. The date is May 24th. Haiti paid reparations to enslavers, and so did Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C., as a matter of fact, is my home. I did not know that until I was today years old. I knew about Haiti. Many people don't. I did not know that right on American soil, in our nation's capital, the United States of America did pay reparations to enslavers. And so this is an issue that cannot be silenced, because no matter if you acknowledge it or if you don't, it will rise to the top. It cannot be suppressed. The way the Tulsa history was suppressed, even as you've said, by those who suffered it, we do have to look at, the motivations of the powerful and the motivations of the disempowered to understand what that tension is, and to understand the myriad motivations that would have people behave in this unified fashion. So although, we say unity, we say that, we think about that as a positive, it's not always a positive if only, a smaller faction or a faction with a specific and narrow interest is directing what that unity looks like. So
absolutely, I totally agree, and exactly what she just said. The victors are the ones that win, that write history. If you look at our textbooks, once I learned about this, I did some research on our textbooks, and there are maybe 3 publishers. If you look at the people that are the writers and the publishers, all, for the most part, white men are telling the stories. And they're all happy and comfortable telling their stories. But they're not hearing, we're not hearing these voices. Even though now the Tulsa Race Massacre is in our standards, it's really just kind of put there. It's maybe a paragraph or 2 in the textbooks now, but it's that powerful that write the stories. And again, whose voices are heard and whose voices are silenced? And what would our history textbooks look like if those that are disenfranchised got to write the history books? How would those stories be different? I think about, go ahead.
I want to jump in here because we've just heard from the descendant of someone who penned a very powerful memoir and gave voice to this experience from the Black perspective. And I'm sharing this because this is night 2 of our event, and I feel it's important to interject that Annalise Brenner is the great-granddaughter of Mary E. Jones Parrish. She is the author of The Nation Must Awake, My Witness to the Tulsa Race Massacre. And obviously it's the namesake for our program. So I'm very, I appreciate Annalise being here and her speaking in this dialogue and this communication, because I think it's really important. And I definitely wanted just to identify you before we got too much further into the discussion. And sorry to disrupt, let's continue, but I felt it important because she was our keynote for the first night. And for those who are joining us for the second, you may not have known that. So just a bit of background there.
And then I know the next meeting on June 9th, we're going to talk about stories. And your story is important. We all have stories to tell. And so if you think about, I speak a lot about using books to teach history instead of using a textbook, using diverse literature to get rid of that single story of the textbook. And so telling stories and letting people tell their stories and reading books puts a human face on the facts of history. Hearing from the survivors. There are some fabulous resources, interviews with the Tulsa Race Massacre survivors. There are books written like Annalise's great grandmother. But stories build empathy and compassion. You can emotionally connect with someone. It allows people to speak for themselves, giving voice to everyone. And that's a huge deal. Not everybody's always had a voice. If you look at statistics, I teach children's lit at OSU. And if you look at statistics, it's still skewed. You have a huge percentage of books by and about white people. There are more books about inanimate objects and animals than there are about Asian Pacific, African American, Native American combined. It's getting better, but the books still aren't there to show everybody. So we need to give voice to everyone. Stories are powerful. Oral history acts as a binding agent for human contact and connection, allowing us to be transformed by the power of an individual story. I just started doing my genealogy because I want to see, want to see past, the family that I know. Story illuminates identity and culture. And so just, what's your story? So there's lots of things that I'm still working on. I'm working on walking as a methodology. I'm encouraging people to get out and explore their town. I didn't have time to read much. I looked up Nyack. So I know there's some history with the Underground Railroad there. I didn't read all the stories yet, but I know there's some things with the Underground Railroad. But I love this quote by Maya Angelou: "There's no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." And so it's really, really important that we share those. So what questions do you have? Please ask questions.
And feel free to unmute yourselves too.
Yes.
If you prefer.
I have a question. I have a question for you. You and I have that in common, that we're both concerned with children's literature. And I know that the stats that you referred to well about the dearth of own voices publications in literature. And I wonder, in your experience, as you're introducing some of this content in your teaching, how is it received by your students?
Different. It's really interesting. So most of the teachers, of course, the statistics, most of the undergrads who are going to be teachers are white, female, upper middle class. And so a lot of times this is their first experience with diversity, is when they come to college. And children's literature is supposed to be at the very beginning of their education courses. And so a lot of them they haven't had the social studies course yet. So they haven't talked much about the Tulsa Race Massacre. And so one of the very first things I do is have them, just kind of list out some of their favorite books. And then we look at those books and we talk about the color of the authors, the color of the main characters, boy, girl, what kind of families. And they start to see that, oh, well, all these books I read are about white people that look just like me. And there has been some pushback at, why are we always talking about diversity? Why do we always have to talk about diversity? But our underpinning in children's lit is long time ago, mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors, that all children need to see themselves in books. But I've had adults that have snapped back, as much as children, teachers even. I was speaking at a reading conference at OSU Tulsa, talking about diverse books. And I mentioned the word LGBTQ books. And I had a teacher yell in the middle of my presentation, said, "What do you mean? What age?" And I said, "Well, I can give you books for, K through 12, whatever you need. There are picture books." And she stood up and started yelling at me that she couldn't stay, and said that, insinuated that by reading a book about a LGBTQ character, it would turn our students gay. So we have that. And then now we have, of course, this whole banning of books. If you look at this issue, Oklahoma has suggested a law. Oklahoma and Texas are having a race to see who can be the worst. Oklahoma has this new thing that they haven't passed it yet, but it's been proposed, where if a child is uncomfortable or a parent is uncomfortable with some of the content in the book, then the book has to be removed. Librarians can get fired, and schools can be fined $10,000 for having these books. If you look at Texas, there's one of the legislatures that has a list of 800 and some books that he wants to get rid of. And if you look at those books, what do you think the characters are?
Female, people of color.
People of color.
And female.
People of color, LGBTQ, female, more than male.
Female authors, apparently. I think I read that.
And so teaching children's lit, it's hard. It's hard for me to tell these teachers, you need to use these books in your classroom. And then they're saying, you can't have these books. So go ahead, Annalise. I'd like to bring something to the table, if I might. We all know, of course, that back during the days of enslavement, it was illegal to teach the enslaved to read, because we know that reading and knowledge are freeing
for the human spirit. And people, quite naturally, all mythology aside, people desire freedom. People desire community. People desire learning. The human mind is engineered that way. Back to the point. When we talk about keeping people from reading and developing in that way, they have a way of going what Carter G. Woodson called fugitive. They call it fugitive pedagogy because there was a secret network of people who would teach others to read. I mean, and so we know that these efforts to suppress knowledge, it has broader implications. But as educators, you know, the community of people with whom you have discourse, I do wonder, you know, some of these models, these older, like I call them analog models, of how people circumvented those kinds of draconian measures to keep them in darkness, in intellectual darkness. What are y'all planning to do about those kinds of things? You know, we see the example in a book by, his name is Jarvis Gibbons, and he talks from Harvard University Press, and he talks about these, during Reconstruction, these schools for Black people were perhaps just a classroom situated within a larger white institution. And the teachers would sit there with one book on their lap and one book on the desk. And the book on the desk was the official book. And the book on the lap was the truth. And they would read from the book in the lap until the administrators would come by to check in and see what they were doing. Not saying that this is what you all should do. I'm simply saying, as a, you know, thematically, what are you all going to do to get around some of these things? Because, you know, we know much of it is really largely symbolic, because people can go home and look at these things on their computers or whatever, and young people will seek out information, particularly things that are verboten. So, you know, could you speak to that a little bit? You know, what you see the landscape looking like? Should these laws be implemented? Should they move forward? Do you think that, you know, yes, it's largely symbolic. Certainly, there are some parents and teachers who buy into it. How will you all navigate that whole landscape with the, you know, censorship? You know, some of the self-censorship and overcorrection that happens when there is a, you know, an official push to suppress information and knowledge.
Well, Oklahoma definitely will have a lot of parents who push back, being pro banning of books. It's been all over. Our governor, we're a Republican state, and it's tough. And it's tough to stand up. I was just talking about this with some of my friends today. It's tough to stand up and tell these future teachers, go out and do it anyway. You know, we want them to use the banned books. We want them to talk about whatever issue comes up in their classrooms. But then they also have the fear of losing their jobs. And so it's a tightrope. We still, you know, this is still conversations that we're having. We encourage them in children's lit to use those books. Our stance is, you know, somebody has a right from keeping their child from reading a book, but they don't have the right to keep anybody else's child from reading a book. So we still are teaching those books. But, you know, depending on the communities, I taught an online children's lit course this semester for our online program, which is mostly rural people who can't get into Stillwater. And so it's online. And I had them, one of the assignments, they had to read a banned book. So they all read a banned book. And some of these people who are going to be teachers said, I understand why this book was banned. Even though I'd said all semester, there is no reason to ban any book. And so it's difficult navigating, you know, Oklahoma is the Bible Belt. And so it's hard to tell these people, it doesn't matter your opinion about LGBTQ or blah, blah, blah. It's not your place. You still have to make sure that all of your children are seen, all of your children are heard, you know, and they have books that look like them. but you're right. It's just really, really difficult to navigate right now. You know, Oklahoma, Texas. I don't know what New York is like. I don't know how conservative or not your area is, but it's difficult. And then you look at all the pressure. Why do you want to teach? Why do I want to encourage people to teach? Oklahoma now has record teachers leaving and a record number of people teaching who aren't certified. We have tons and tons and tons. You know, we had a few emergency certifications, and now all of a sudden we have thousands in Oklahoma. So it's a slippery slope. We haven't been told that we can't use our diverse books. So we are going to keep on, you know. I don't know what's going to happen. I can't imagine that law passing, but then it would not surprise me. You know, we just passed the strictest abortion law in the whole United States 2 days ago. So, but by golly, we're going to arm our teachers.
Wow.
We're going to get rid of books, but we're going to arm our teachers. So I don't know.
That's a daunting landscape.
It is.
I just want to give voice to this question from Ruth Armstrong. She asks, how old are the children you teach, and what is the racial makeup of your school?
I teach at Oklahoma State University now. I've taught there for the past 5 years. I'm assistant professor. So again, most of our undergrad teachers are, you know, the typical white middle class. I taught the elementary school that I taught in was actually the elementary school I went to, white. So my worldview was very limited growing up in the white community and coming back to the same community. It's really interesting. Once I've started doing some research, many teachers in Oklahoma go back and teach at the same school or the same school district that they attended. And I don't think that's a good, now after having experienced it for 30 years, I don't think that's a good choice. It's just like, you know, the preacher coming back to go to church at the church that he preached at, you know, you don't get a whole lot of experience. So the racial makeup of Sand Springs, the racial makeup of the education, you know, OSU is a diverse community. It's a diverse university, but education itself, it's all women, mostly. I mean, every once in a while I'll have a man, and I'm so excited when we have a guy who wants to be an elementary teacher, and mostly white women, 18, 19, 20, 21-ish.
Thank you. Thank you. We actually are at time.
Oh
no! A little bit over, but I wanted to thank you both actually for being a part of this conversation. I very much appreciated your sharing